uh, what it's called is a convocation, which is a mandatory meeting, okay, of the church. It is a mandatory meeting with God of the church where you go and you pray and you talk to God, or you spend time with God and you grow with God. So it's called, and I hope everybody's taking notes or whatnot, because these things are not easy to remember, a lot of them. Um, so let me get that out of the way for a moment. Okay, so there was a Dr. Totten, Totten, professor of astronomy at Yale University. He said, in spite of all our bickerings with the calendar, it is patent that the human race never lost the septenary or the 7-day sequence of weekdays, and that the Sabbath of these latter times comes down to us from Adam through the ages without a single lapse. Now, what that is saying is simply that the 7-day week, Sunday being the first day of the week and Saturday being the 7th day week of the week, it has never changed. It has gone down through history the same way. It started on Sunday with day one, and it ended on Saturday with day 7. And we're going to get into that in here in just a little bit. Now, is this statement true? And if so, can it be proven? And if so, how? At the end of the creation week in Genesis 1, God finished his activity with a special creation. In Genesis 2, 1 through 3, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it that he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Okay, that's Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. 25 centuries later at Mount Sinai, God gave the 10 Commandments to the nation of Israel through Moses. The Sabbath command the Sabbath command in Exodus directly referred to the creation count in Genesis 2. Now, what this is saying is that the fourth commandment, by remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy as I am holy, it's saying that is directly referred to the creation account in Genesis 2, 1 through 3, where it talks about what we just said, how God did all his work in 6 days and on the 7th day rested. That's what the fourth commandment was in direct referral to. In Genesis, it says in Exodus 20, 8 through 11, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, which means if you've got somebody staying over or you put somebody up for the night that was out in the cold. Okay? And it says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is within them, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That means he set it aside and made it a special day. Okay, like his Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Day of Pentecost, the Day of Atonement. So he did all of this, okay? Now, I want you to catch a hold of something, because a lot of people seem to think that they can believe their pastor about what day is actually the biblical Sabbath. Okay? Now, like I said last night, I'm not trying to badmouth any pastor. I'm not trying to put them down or say that they don't know what they're talking about. All I'm doing is teaching what is of the Bible. If they think that what they're teaching of the Bible is correct, then so be it. All I'm telling you is that I don't take my teachings from mankind. I take my teachings from God. Now, what I was about to say is, in the beginning of the fourth commandment, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This is the only commandment of the 10. It's the only commandment of the 10. There's no decree, there's no statute, or no command that God gives like this. He says to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. It's the only one that starts out remember. That means don't forget. A lot of years have passed, but the tradition, or not the tradition, don't say that, okay? That's a bad word. The fourth commandment, or the Sabbath day, has always remained the same day. Okay, and we're going to get into a couple of, well, what about this and what about that? What about Joshua's long day? We're going to get into all that, okay? But it's the only commandment that he says to remember, and it's the easiest one that we forget. Like I said last night, it's not hard to follow all 10 commandments. It's not. You don't have to murder. You don't have to steal. You don't have to commit adultery. You don't have to covet your neighbor, covet your neighbor's spouse. You don't have to covet any of his stuff. You don't have to bear false witness against your brother, which is gossip. It's not only gossip, but it's spreading lies about your brother. Okay, you don't have to do any of those things. But we do all of those things. Why? Because man's law says you don't do them. If you do, this is what's going to happen. Well, through the Mosaic law, God gave Moses, because you have to understand that when Moses brought the children of Israel out, okay, so you're looking at about 420 years, okay? When he brought the children of Israel out of Israel, he brought out approximately 250 million people. Okay? That's a lot of people to not have a law to command them. Okay, so God gave him the 10 Commandments, which was God's law, which we are still under, the 10 Commandments. And then he gave him the Mosaic law to say, hey, if you do any of these things wrong, or if you break covenant with me, or if you end up getting leprosy, or you end up getting this, or you do this and break the laws of God, then this is what's going to happen to you. So it was like man's law today, although when Christ was crucified, the Mosaic law went away. Okay, and man's law was created later down the road. All right, so it's the only one that God says to remember. Now, these are plain, clear verses stating that God made the Sabbath, rested on it, sanctified it or set it apart, and blessed it. He also made the seventh day of a 7-day cycle. The purpose here is to prove that the weekly cycle has never changed since creation, although many think that it has. They think that it has because we went from using the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. We're going to get into that, okay? If the 7-day cycle has been broken or lost, there is no further obligation for mankind to observe the true Sabbath of the Bible. It's that simple. Okay? So if it's been lost, if the 7-day week has been lost, There's no purpose in us following watching or following the true Sabbath. I'm sorry, I zoned out for a moment. Okay, people often ask, well, I know God created the Sabbath, but how do we know now which day of our week he made holy? Or hasn't mankind changed the calendar? And still, our seventh day, Saturday, was named after a pagan god, Saturn. So some question whether this had an effect on the Hebrew calendar. Still others ask about what has been called the long day of Joshua, or traveling around the world and gaining or losing a day. These questions, while individually important, collectively represent a single great question. All the powerful is the all-powerful God of the universe capable of creating, hallowing, sanctifying, and blessing the seventh day of the week, yet at the same time incapable of keeping track of this day throughout history? Think about it. Would God command people to remember the Sabbath only to forget that he must preserve it for this to be possible? That's absurd. It insults God's power by making him appear to be some doddering old man who is so disorganized and forgetful that he cannot keep track of what he has created or commanded. And that's basically what it does when these people say Sunday is the true biblical or the true Sabbath. But if you corner these people, they will never say it is the true biblical Sabbath. They'll say it is the true Sabbath. But they don't dare go biblical, okay? Because biblically, they can be proven wrong, and they know it, okay? The world's professing Christianity, Catholicism, and various Protestantism keeps Sunday. It has been the Roman Catholic Church that has kept Sunday as the day of worship. The Roman Catholic Church. They're the ones that have kept that. Okay, now I was reading last evening after my broadcast yesterday evening, I was reading about when the Catholic Church became Christian. And there's no date that I've read about so far. However, there are a lot of rules that the Catholic Church teaches that are not biblically sound. Why? Because they say that they are the only ones with the authority or the Pope is the only ones with the authority to change or to explain the Bible. Okay? The Bible interprets itself, but the Catholic Church says that they are the only ones that are allowed to, and that's one of their rules, to interpret the Word of God. They said that the Pope, who is supposed to be the highest religious person in the world, has the same powers and authority as Jesus does. Okay, which we know this is another false teaching and false doctrine. All right, he's just a man. The Pope is just a man. Jesus is God incarnate. Okay, so, and we'll do another teaching on the Roman Catholic Church. I know that I got some Roman Catholic followers that listen to me, but there are things that need to be put out there that are not true. There are a lot of teachings. They teach that Mary is the one who brings healing, not Jesus. They worship Mary more than Jesus. So we'll do another teaching on that sometime, and we'll get it all out there, okay? Now, a letter by James Cardinal Gibbons, Archbishop of Baltimore from 1877 to 1921 said, Is Saturday the seventh day according to the Bible and the Ten Commandments? I answer, yes. This is a cardinal bishop. Is Sunday the first day of the week, and did the church, Roman Catholic, change the seventh day, Saturday, for Sunday, the first day? I answer, yes. Did Christ change the day? I answer, no. This is a Roman cardinal bishop for the Roman Catholic Church from 1877 to 1921. That's 23 and 21, 46 years, 44 years. Okay? So if he had said this and it wasn't true, don't you think they would have gotten rid of him long before they did? Or long before he died? No one ever seems to question that the first day of the week is Sunday. Businesses, their first day of the week is Sunday. You might go in and work Monday is the first of the week, as far as you're concerned. But on a business calendar, every single business is every single business their first day of the week is Sunday. Okay, now, in my experience of going from church to church to church, and I speak with every pastor that I go and visit their church. I speak with them because I want to know how they teach their church, okay? So I've never yet met a pastor who said that the biblical Sabbath was Sunday. Not one time have I ever heard that. I would ask them, Pastor, what do you think the biblical Sabbath is? And they say, Bill, as far as I know, it's Saturday. Then why don't we go to church on Saturday? Why? Because the United States of America years ago passed a Sunday closing law. And I'm sure that this had to do with the alcohol time frame. I'm not sure. But they created what is called a Sunday closing law. Now, I did ask one pastor of a church that I attended, and I asked him, brother, what is the true biblical Sabbath? He said, Bill, as far as I know, it's Saturday. I said, okay, then why don't we go to church on Saturday? And he said, that's all fine and well, Bill, but what are you going to do about all the businesses that are open on Saturday? And not only that, but what about the hospitals, the nursing homes, the in-home health care people? What are you going to do about them? Well, I was still new in my walk and still new in learning. However, I went from standing in front of the pulpit talking to him to my car and got to the edge of the driveway in my car, and the Holy Spirit told me, I don't care. God doesn't care about man making money on his biblical Sabbath. And Jesus himself said it's okay to do good on the Sabbath. Jesus said that, which means if you are rendering medical care, okay, if you are taking care of somebody on a Saturday, medically taking care of them, whether it be in a hospital or a nursing home or in-home health care, you're blessed for that. You are blessed for that. Okay? Anything else other than that, other than medical care, it falls out of the line. It falls out of the line and falls under sin. Okay? It falls under sin because you are purposely breaking one of God's commandments, okay, which we are still under the commandments. That is God's law. In the Old Testament, there were two laws. There was the Mosaic law and God's law. The Mosaic law was nailed to the cross because Christ took all the world's sin, now past, present, and future. He took it all on him. And when he did that, he drank that hyssop or that bile and that vinegar that the guard gave him on that sponge on top of that hyssop. When he drank that, God could no longer look at his son, because he became the world's sin, and God cannot look on sin without bringing judgment. That's biblical. He cannot look at sin without bringing judgment. Now, the church is under judgment right now. The church is under judgment right now. You ask any pastor, and they'll tell you. Or look at my Facebook page and go down through there and find Brother Greg Locke. Okay, he's in total agreement with me. The church is under judgment. That's why you've got such a big time falling away. And that's why you've got people that are sitting on the pews holding sin in their heart. And by that I mean holding hate and anger and resentment in their heart, sitting on the pew. And when they're called to an altar call, they don't go. They sit there and hold it in, and they think they're going to get into heaven. Jesus said that you won't. Jesus said, if you've got anger and hatred in your heart for your brother, if you can't forgive him, I can't forgive you before my Father and the holy angels which are in heaven. And when he says that ain't going to happen, then it ain't going to happen. I don't care how long you've been in church. I don't care how much in tithes you paid. I don't care how much offering you give. I don't care how much you work for the church. If you stand before God with hate in your heart and non-forgiveness of your brethren, I don't care if it's a child, if it's a brother or a sister, a mom, a dad, a aunt, a uncle, or the stranger down the street who accidentally walked into your car and put a dent in it. And if you can't forgive him over a material object, guess what? Ain't going to happen. You're not getting into heaven's doors. Forgiveness, love and forgiveness is what God and Jesus Christ are all about. Okay? So, no one ever seems to question, though, the first day of the week being Sunday. Okay? However, the biblical Sabbath says that it's the seventh day of the week that God sanctioned or sanctified. That's the only day of the week that he sanctified. How can you confuse that? Man, the pastors and the churches, I've already told you about the 501c3. I'm going to go a little bit step further than that and say that they ain't got no spinal columns in their back. They ain't got no spines in their back. If they did, they'd stop having church services on Sunday and start having them on Saturday, the biblical Sabbath. There's no spines. There's no spines. We don't want to ruffle the waters. And then the government will start hollering about, how can you open your church on a Saturday? How can you do such a thing? The church is already being sunk by the liberal left. The church is going down by the liberal left. And the church is sitting there allowing it. So when there's no more protection, once the church is gone and there's no more protection, it's nobody's fault for those that get left behind but theirs. I know that truth hurts. I'm sorry, but I'm not called to lie. I'm not called to make things easy. I'm not called to preach a little ear-tingling, tickling music. You don't give me no money. So I don't have any other recourse but to tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. It's unthinkable to suggest that so many people would either purposely, carelessly, or inadvertently be keeping their day the first day of the week. Purposely, carelessly, or inadvertently. So that covers everything. If you're going to church on Sunday, you're not excused. You're not excused. You're not. Not until you repent and start having attending services on a Saturday. That's God's law. We have no right, no room, and he gave nobody the authority on this earth to change that rule or to change that law. Nobody. I don't go to church for this purpose. I will not step foot in a church that has church on Sunday, and I will not, because of God's decree to me, I will not defile myself by going into a church that has a 501c3 program to it. That is money that is given to Baal, to the kingdom of darkness. You can think that it's going to yours. Now, I heard a long time ago, I was told, once you put that money into your tithe, or you put that money into your offering, then you shouldn't really worry about it anymore. I don't go to McDonald's because they give a big fat paycheck every year of $10,000 to the LGBTQ or QT, whatever it's called. I haven't gone to McDonald's in about 12 years because of that. And God would not want my money, his money, going to McDonald's because of that. Do I hate gays? No. I love everybody. There is nobody in this world that's any different to me than anybody else. It's not about hating anybody. I tell these leftists all the time that want to argue and argue and argue. It's not about hating anybody. It's about hating the sin. And that's what we're told to do. And if you don't do that, if you back up people that are gay, or you back up somebody with a transgender lifestyle, or any of that, you're just as guilty as they are. So says the Word of God. You're just as guilty. If you back somebody up because they had an abortion, you're just as guilty. And when you stand before the Lord, the blood of that baby is going to be on your hands as well. It's just that simple. That's truth. That is biblical truth. So it's unthinkable to suggest that so many people would either purposely, carelessly, or inadvertently be keeping their day, which is the biblical Sabbath, the first day of the week. Okay? Sunday on the wrong day. But Jews are no less certain that they are keeping the Sabbath on the true seventh day of the week. The Jewish people have been responsible for keeping track of their day, the same day kept by Yeshua, Jesus, and the apostles for many centuries, longer than Catholics have been tracking their day. Okay, and something that really sticks in my crawl is when I hear these radio people on the radio talking about Sunday being the Lord's Day. Now, there's only two different kinds of days that can be called the Lord's Day. One of them is spoken of in Isaiah. And the other one is spoken of by John in the book of Revelation, where he is in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, which is the day of wrath. Okay, and that's how God shows him everything. This is the Lord's Day. So, Sunday is not the Lord's Day. It never has been the Lord's Day, and it's just a bunch of fickle people that refuse to actually comply with God's law versus man's tradition. It's just that simple. Why did God give the Sabbath through Moses? He had to. That's the first time I'd ever heard anything like he had to. God had to. Israel had just spent, and this is why, okay? Israel had just spent nearly 2.5 centuries, nearly 450 years in Egypt. With most of that time in slavery, they were not permitted to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For all those years, when God freed them, they had forgotten the identity of the true God and his Sabbath. Okay, that's why he had to give it through Moses, because Moses had just brought all 250 million of God's people out of Egypt, walking. Okay? And when he gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and the fourth one was to remember the Sabbath, he had to do that because he had to ensure that they knew what the right day was that they were supposed to be worshiping the Lord on. Now, you're supposed to worship the Lord, praise the Lord, talk to the Lord, pray to the Lord every single day. That's our obligation. What has He done for us? He gave His life for us. So our obligation is to worship, pray, adore, talk to Him, spend time with Him each and every day. Driving your car, you're sitting there talking to your neighbors or whoever's in the car with you, your family, talking gibberish about this person or that person, gossiping. I know it goes on. So that's driving in your car. What about when you go to Walmart? What if you see a woman struggling with 5 young toddlers? And these toddlers are really giving her the what's up, what's down, what's for, and the down the road. They're giving it to her, making life miserable for her. Have you ever walked over to her and said, "Can I play with a couple of your kids over in the toy section while you do what you need to do?" Or just help her gather her kids there. Okay? You all know how to be moms and how to be dads. You know how that. You've already done your job. These young people that are having babies every day and they've only got one income coming in the house, either by a single parent or by divorce or by a widower. That makes me sad because I think about my mom. But anyway, you know what that's like. So why not go help that young lady out or that young man out? I say young man because there's just as many single parent dads as there are for single parent moms. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing how everything is so bad for single parent moms. I was a single parent of 2 boys. And I raised them by myself pretty much. Did I get help from my parents? Yeah. Why? Because they were my parents. And they knew what I was doing. I was working full time, putting myself through nursing school, and raising my children. So I know what it's like. And I have every bit of respect for the women that are single mothers as I do for the men that are single fathers. I've went into county attorney's offices, and they've showed me their file rooms of all the numbers or all the folders of the irresponsible fathers that don't pay their child support. And then they show me the next room, and there's just as many irresponsible mothers that don't pay their child support. So do I feel sorry for one that I don't for the other? No, I don't, because I've been on both spectrums and I know what it's like. So God had Moses bring all 250 million people out of Egypt, bondage, and then they had to start with teaching them all over again who God was. And the first thing that they did was God give Moses the 10 Commandments. Okay? Now, when God freed them, they had forgotten the identity of the true God and His Sabbath. In the wilderness, Israel grumbled to Moses because they lacked food. God had to test whether they would obey His law, a specific test designed to teach Israel the uniqueness of the Sabbath's holy time. This account is found in Exodus 16, illustrating that people can find themselves thinking that time had been lost. Okay, now we all know that there were more than one time that Israel did this to Moses. It was like 3 different times, and God almost wiped Israel out all 3 times, just left a remnant. Okay, and then had to rebuild. And then the last time He marched them around in circles for 40 years until the grumbling and the moaners, the ones that came out of Israel, until they had died off. So He could start fresh with a new group. Why did God give in Exodus chapter 16 verses 9 through 10 and 13, it says, "And Moses spake unto Aaron, Say unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord. Now he's telling Moses, tell him to come to the bottom of Mount Sinai. All right? So he says, tell him to come near before the Lord. For he hath heard your murmurings. And it came to pass, as Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. That was called the Shekinah glory. That's what was following them. Okay, it's what ended up leading them during the daylight, and at nighttime a pillar of fire would lead them. Okay, so that they could move about at night as well as during the day. God was always with them. Okay, so appeared in a cloud, and it came to pass that even the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay around about the host, or around the group of people, the 250 million people. All right. It is important to realize now, when they were talking about food, they were talking about meat. They had no meat. They were in the desert. I wish somebody would tell these people that live in the desert today, you ain't never going to grow nothing here. It's all sand. It won't work. But it's important to realize that the quail did not come up until after dusk. Okay? Now, to talk about that for just a moment, we all know that in the Genesis, in the beginning, God says, I'll tell you here in just a second. It's important, that they didn't come up until after dusk, and that Israel was gathered as a congregation on the Sabbath day. They were gathered for religious service, which is a convocation, which means a mandatory meeting with God. The quails appeared after the Sabbath was over, after church was over, after the Sabbath was over, and they were permitted to gather them for the evening meal. Now, picture this, a large group of people, 250 million people, and quails just start walking into their camp among them to be slaughtered and killed and eaten. God is so good. He is so good all the time. The next day, on the first day of the week, Sunday, was the first day the manna appeared. Now, manna is bread, This was the story of the manna from heaven taught in church, where God instructed the children on that day, instructed the children that on day 6, now every other day up through day 5, 1 through 5, they were together for one day. On day 6, they were together for 2 days, because there was not going to be any Sabbath given or any manna sent down from heaven on the Sabbath. That was work, and you don't work on the Sabbath. So God instructed the children that on day 6 to gather enough for the 2 days, for there would be no manna on the 7th day or the Sabbath day. The 7th day is the Sabbath day. All right? Now, as in the case always, there were those who did not believe God, and in disobedience went out on the Sabbath day to gather manna, and there was none. This angered God. And he said to Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, he's blaming Moses. Moses is the leader. All right. So he's blaming Moses. How long are you going to refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? He heard Moses tell the people that. He heard them. But he blamed, God blamed Moses. He was angry with Moses because Moses, in his eyes, Moses hadn't done what he needed to do. Just a moment. Thank you. So this angered God, and he asked God, or he asked Moses this question. It says, "See, for the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you the sixth day the bread of 2 days." This is Moses fussing at the children of Israel. Now, you have to understand something now. Moses spoke with a stutter. Okay, and that's why when he went back to Egypt to deal with Pharaoh, he had to have Aaron with him, because Aaron was one that spoke very clear, very elegantly, and Moses was afraid that they would laugh at him. And I don't understand this part of it, because Moses grew up in Egypt. Moses was a prince of Egypt, but Moses had a stutter. Okay? Now, it says, "See, for the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you the sixth day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, let no man out of his place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. Okay, that's the following week, I guess. Setting confusion and disobedience to the side, this shows God made a specific place and time holy, the seventh day. That's his day. That's the day that God said, "I want my people to draw nearer to me." They're not going to have nothing else to do, because I told them to gather enough bread on the sixth day. They've got meat. I told them not to gather more than they needed. They gathered enough for 2 days on the sixth day. So all they should have to do is rest and draw closer to me through my convocations. 1,500 years later, the account of Exodus is the example of Christ. He had no doubt which day was the Sabbath. Why? Remember what I said earlier? He was God incarnate. He was God incarnate, God in the flesh. In Mark 2 and 27 through 28, Jesus said, he was recorded speaking to the Pharisees, saying, "And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Now, that little statement right there, "And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." That means he created a day, set aside a day especially, he sanctified it, he hallowed it, he made it holy, just to draw near to his people. That's what that means. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, here is where the churches go wrong. God, or Jesus, was not telling the Pharisees, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, so you can make any day of the week your Sabbath, as long as you make out one day for the Sabbath to praise me. We're supposed to praise and worship him 7 days a week. The Bible says pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. That means don't ever stop talking to God. Now, we also realize that we've got jobs, and sometimes we have to talk on those jobs. Okay? But you understand what I'm saying. He is saying that day, God, Jesus Christ, set aside that day before time even began, before the Genesis creation. He already had that day marked. Okay? And then in Exodus 16, when he gave Moses the 10 Commandments, he just gave it to Israel again to remind them who he was and what day he made holy. Okay? Now, when he said, therefore the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, he wasn't saying you can make whatever day that you want to make it your Sabbath. That is not what Jesus is saying, and anybody that says any different is a liar, and the truth is not in them. What he was saying is that I'm the one that created the Sabbath. I picked the day of the Sabbath. I picked what happens on the Sabbath. So nobody else has the right to change it but me, the Son of Man. That's what Jesus was saying in that little bitty statement right there. That's a lot to say, a lot in that little bitty two-sentence statement. Now today, many mistake this phrase to mean that Christ was saying you can make any day of the Sabbath, or any day the Sabbath, as long as you commit one day to the Lord. This is false teaching and false doctrine in which the Lord never said or taught. It is simply saying that if Christ were Lord of the Sabbath, then surely he would know what day of the Sabbath, or what day the Sabbath day was. He's the one that created it. He's the one that made it. He picked it out from the beginning of time. Luke 4:16 says, he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. As was his custom, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. That right there tells you it's all in a nutshell right there. Okay? In AD 69 and 70, all Jews were driven from Palestine and dispersed into nations around the world. Through the last 19 centuries, they have never been confused about which day was the Sabbath. In Luke 4:16, 17, and 20, remember, it showed Christ meeting with the Jews in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Okay? Today, if time had been lost, we would expect that the Jews scattered around the world and no longer in communication with one another would be keeping different days. However, today, they are all in unity, in agreement on which day the Sabbath day is. Many have gone home. Not all yet. Many have gone home. Okay? Many are going home every day. Okay? And it's not going to stop until the time is trodden under by the Gentiles. A historian said once, more than the Jews having kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. Make sense? More than the Jews keeping the Sabbath has kept the Jews. There's no doubt that through the 1500 years until Christ's time was certainly not confused and knew when to keep it. There's also no doubt that the Jews have kept it intact ever since. Somebody had to be tracking it. Who else would track it? Who else would track it but God's people? Christ's obedience to the Sabbath throughout his lifetime, without the need to look back in time, let's consider one other objection that comes out. Some will argue, what about Joshua? Did he not have some kind of a long day in the Old Testament? Yes, he did. Did that day not throw time off and make Sunday the seventh day of the week? Is this true? Let's look at the account in Joshua 10. Okay, so let me get the word opened up here to Joshua 10. Trey and I were looking at this last night, and there are some drawings on YouTube that you can pull up. And when you pull them up, it'll show you the correct and the incorrect. It'll show you the correct and the incorrect way in which the Bible figures this out. Okay. Okay. So, let's go to Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. And it says, Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, Sun, S-U-N, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Yasher? So the sun, S-U-N, stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Okay, now let's look at the definition of things, okay? In Joshua 10, 12 through 13, it says, we just read that, okay? All right. So the scripture states that the sun stood still for about a whole day. I will later show that God defines a normal day as 24 hours, all right? A clever argument has been used to teach that Joshua's long day caused Sunday to become the new seventh day of the week. Carefully following the logic of this teaching, this is how it's best summarized. The week in which Joshua's long day occurred contained an extra 24-hour period. This would be the period described as about a whole day. If Joshua's battle occurred, say, on a Thursday, then there were 8 24-hour periods in that week of Joshua's long day instead of 7. Okay, 24 hours, 1 day, 7 times. And if there was an actual 24 hours included, that would make 8 days in that month that had 24 hours in it instead of just 7. Since Thursday would be about 48 hours long, it would now include Friday. Now, this is figuring it based on people saying this is how it became Sunday to be the Sabbath. The following day become the day that was Friday. Thursday would be about 48 hours long. It would now include Friday. The following day would become the day that was Saturday, and Saturday, what would have been the seventh day of this week, would become Sunday. Okay? Now, this faulty logic would continue by